Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. If you are already on our webinar, thank you for joining. This is David Friedler from Simpactful. We're going to wait another 2 minutes to give more people a chance to join. So thanks for being prompt and coming on, and we'll get started in a couple minutes. You've just joined in the last 30 seconds. Thank you for joining our Simpactful webinar. This is David Friedler, managing partner here at Simpactful. We will get started in another minute. We're just trying to give a chance for more people to log in. I will say we are recording, so you're already on recording with this. And if you do have a question on anything, please submit that through the Q&A button on this, not the chat, but the Q&A. So we'll get started here in a few more minutes, or 1 more minute, excuse me. Okay, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. This is David Friedler. Thank you for joining our Simpactful webinar on taking charge of chargebacks. In a minute, I'll go around and do the introductions, but I did want to lead off just with a few housekeeping things. For those of you that are familiar with today's world of Zoom, or obviously other video shares, this is different as a webinar. We do not see you, those of us presenting do not see those who are participating. There is not an open dialogue channel here like we would normally have. You are on mute. And again, we don't see your picture on the screen, nor can anyone else. But if you do have questions, we would love to field those and do our best to answer them now or after the webinar. And if you go to the Q&A button on your Zoom link, that will allow you to submit questions to us that, again, we'll do our best to answer now or in follow-up. In addition, we are recording this session to help ensure there's a record of it and to share with others. And if you would like a recording to share with family and friends or coworkers, more importantly, please feel free to let us know after, and we'd be happy to share a link to that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And I am your moderator here today, David Friedler, again, Simpactful President and Managing Partner. My career has included working at consumer products goods companies in the industry like Clorox and Diamond Foods. And I'll turn it over to Lindsay to introduce herself, and we'll go through the list here.
Yeah, Lindsay McShane, and I've spent 30 plus years in CPG, mostly at Procter & Gamble and Clorox. And after that, I retired and have been working with Simpactful as a senior partner. And my background is all supply chain, so from manufacturing through transportation and warehousing. And over the last 5 years, when I've been working with Simpactful, have done lots of work in the fines and fees space.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Stark. So similar to Lindsay, I have almost 30 years experience in the CPG industry, all supply chain with the exception of a little stint in a customer marketing role. So my experience has been with Kraft Foods and Mondelez. Those who may not know Mondelez, it's the old Nabisco company, Oreo, Triscuit. And the last 8 years at Mondelez, I really focused on e-commerce supply chain. So working specifically with Amazon on the end-to-end supply chain, as well as building e-commerce capabilities within Mondelez Logistics Network. I did retire from Mondelez in September, and so now I'm doing some consulting specifically in the e-commerce supply chain and Amazon chargebacks and shortages and root cause analysis and that type of thing. And I'm excited to be part of this webinar today and partnering with Simpactful in helping different retailers or vendors be able to improve their supply chain with e-commerce.
And I'm Neil Dillette, senior partner with Simpactful. I work for both Accenture and for Procter & Gamble and have end-to-end supply chain experience. I worked in 5 different manufacturing plants and then moved over to the commercial side and worked in customer service operations. And last part of my career, I supplied Walmart for 7 years. And also within P&G, I was one of the continuous improvement facilitators and teachers for over 30 years.
Wonderful. I won't add up all of our years of service here. It's probably a little bit of a large number, but I would say you all look very young. So credit to all of you. Just briefly, Simpactful, if you don't know about us, we are a 8-year-old consulting firm who is made up of a group of practitioners, not career consultants. And so as practitioners, we all have the experience that Lindsay and Cheryl and Neil just shared, but from a broader range of companies, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, and not just companies from the manufacturer side, but we also have a lot of team members from the retail side as well. And you can see those logos with representation from Walmart, Target, Kroger, Amazon, and more. And as a company, we work in a number of different spaces. This is a page that we use to kind of showcase our focus areas and capability areas. You can see across the top the 5 areas and then some of the individual spaces beneath that. When it comes to this call, we're very focused, obviously, on supply chain and operating, but also we'll talk through, as we do, some of the things that need to be done retailer by retailer, and particularly as you negotiate back to reduce the chargebacks and deductions with retailers. So this fits squarely in the Simpactful capability space and one of the areas that we do a lot of focus on with clients. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Neil Dillette to go through the materials.
Yeah, and the first thing we wanted to do is kind of set the stage for what do you mean by chargeback? And these are the fines and fees that are automatically levied by retailers, and they typically show up in your accounts receivable. And so typically when we talk chargebacks, there's 2 major areas where we've done a lot of work. Those are in the fines and fees area, and also in the OS&D, or over shorts and damages. And we list both of those because we've had clients where 50% is about the same level of fines and fees and over shorts and damages. So it's important to be looking at both of those buckets of money because they're both hits to your margin and your bottom line. So the first section is fines and fees. And typically the majority of the fines and fees come from on time and full charges. There are, the retailers are becoming more creative with other fines and fees that are coming on. They're fining you for EDI transactions that are incorrect, labeling and packaging issues as well. Anything that tends to be a productivity drain for a retailer, they are starting to fine those just so that all suppliers are delivering them the right product the first time. And then the second part is on OS&Ds. Typically those are, an example is you tell the retailer you ship them 1,000 units. They say they only received 900, so they only pay you for 900. When in actuality, you did ship them 1,000, and an issue in receiving was the reason that a deduction is showing up on your account. So just to set the stage on chargebacks, those are typically the things that we are talking about. On the next slide, we talk about why are retailers doing this. And initially retailers, the focus that they were trying to drive was supplier efficiency. They wanted you to deliver what they ordered when they ordered it, which then would increase in-stock levels and drive sales. And what it was used for was to incent manufacturers just to hit the delivery window with the quantities that were ordered. Now, as people have continued to work on that and improve, they've started to introduce other fines and fees. And these fines and fees are more directed at what I would call productivity hits in the company. If your packaging is not meeting labeling requirements and they have to pull that product aside and spend time on it, they're now starting to assess fines to pay for the extra productivity in the DCs that they're having to address the issues that you're sending. And, some people also talk about this is a means for retailers to increase their margins. And as people have gotten better and better, the targets have been raised. And an example here was when Walmart originally rolled out their on time and in full targets, the target for each of those metrics was 95%. And just recently, they raised those to 98%. And while many companies were able to successfully hit the 95 percentile target, when they raised it to 98%, the effort that's required to deliver that is much higher. And so people are seeing higher levels of fines and fees, and people view it as, just a drain on resources and also on their margin. The next slide. And one of the things that we always talk about is people spend a lot of time getting their money back, but we also want people to focus on how do I stop these fines and fees from happening in the first place? Because more retailers are charging fines and fees, and the types of fines and fees are escalating. And so you're having to pay more. And as I mentioned in the OS&D example, when these fines and fees are not accurate, the responsibility is on the supplier to provide evidence to come back and prove that they don't deserve to be fined. And so that's another reason why these types of fines and fees are growing. It's because people don't have the resources to address it, or they are just not successful in scraping back the fines that they've been assessed. And so, as I mentioned, troubleshooting each and every one of these fines and fees, it's very resource intensive. And as it's expanding to more retailers, the amount of work that each supplier is having to do to address these areas is increasing. And over on the right side of this slide, it talks about, are your fines and fees greater than 0.4% of your gross revenue? And that's typically a benchmark measure that we've seen that some of the best companies are less than that level. But even if you are a larger CPG supplier, 4% of your gross revenue is still going to result in millions of dollars of fines. And so even if you are at a percentage that is that low, the dollar value is definitely worth the investment to try and reduce that, because this is one of the few profitability levers that you actually control, and it's a large pot of money. Next slide.
Neil, thank you. And Cheryl, as you get started, I just want to reinforce for those online, if you have any questions, submit. The Q&A line is open, and you should be able to submit questions in there that we will either react to here live or do our best to do follow up on. So please submit any questions you may have. Cheryl.
Yes. So which retailers have broadly adopted these chargebacks? I know what you're thinking. Well, every single one of them has, and you're right. But if you think about it traditionally, traditional grocery stores, or if you look at the industry, traditional grocery stores didn't really have a really robust set of chargebacks. It was really more in that other channels like mass, value, drug, and certainly with e-commerce. And really what's triggered this is the availability of technology and the volume of data that's available, and the technology being able to identify all of these defects in the supply chain, as well as being able to automatically generate chargebacks and deduct for those defects or those chargebacks. Obviously, Amazon is a big driver of that, but we see it across all retailers, including Walmart, mass, value. The other thing that we're seeing within the industry as there's consolidation in M&A, think about Kroger adopting or merging with Albertsons. Most likely that new entity is going to adopt the chargeback program that's kind of the the sum of them all. And so we'll probably see more chargebacks on that Albertsons volume that we might not have seen traditionally when Albertsons was its own standalone entity. So not only is the consolidation of the industry as well as the availability of technology and the availability of the amount of information, that's all driving being able to identify chargebacks and generate those chargebacks. If you go to the next page, what kind of trends are we seeing? Well, again, as systems and information becomes more available and more sophisticated, a lot of that is driving these trends, such as dark warehouses, right? You now have warehouses that, or stores that people don't physically go into, similar to an Amazon fulfillment center. I know many traditional retailers have dark warehouses, and that's going to have a different set of requirements to be able to ship and have received in those dark warehouses versus a traditional grocery store. We see thresholds of those chargebacks escalating. So as Neil mentioned, the Walmart on time in full went from 95% to 98%. But you think about not just the thresholds, the amount that's being charged, but the number of defects that are being charged is escalating as well. And again, that's all part of systems and availability and having that technology to be able to identify those different types of defects and charge back for them. We're also seeing fees for new warehouse spaces. So an example I have of this is Amazon has a program called Vendor Flex, where the vendor will give Amazon some space in their distribution center, and Amazon creates a little mini fulfillment center just for that distributor, or just for that vendor's products. Traditionally and originally, it was a collaboration. The vendor gave Amazon the space, didn't charge rent for it. Amazon provided the technology and the labor. Now Amazon is starting to ask for fees or for some cost sharing or labor, or whatever it might be, to be able to use that warehouse space as a mini fulfillment center. So you see as time goes on, there's a transition for fees for these different types of programs. We also see higher rates for per compliance. So we've seen that, especially the Walmart going from 95 to 98. Amazon has a chargeback for case label compliance that used to be $5. Now it can go up to $15, depending on how many different types of defects that you have. Obviously, expanding channels where our items are being sold. So traditional retail, mass, but now we're seeing value, we're seeing C-stores, we're seeing drugstores selling a lot of these traditional CPG items that may not have been sold in those. And then the increased complexity to manage. So not only do all these retailers have fees and fines, but they're all different. So Kroger's okay if you deliver early, Walmart and Amazon, not so much, and they'll charge a fee if you even deliver early, which is something that has kind of mind-boggling to say, well, I'm giving it to you before you want it. But the logic is, well, that's not when I want it. So a fee or a fine is charged for that. If you go to the next page. So what does it take to really resolve these chargebacks? And we're going to go through some case studies that give you a little bit more detail, but I'm going to give you an example, and this will lead into a case study that I'm going to talk about. But say you just want to change your case label, because there's different requirements that retailers have. And so you're going to want to change your case label. So now you have a new case label, and you start thinking about this case label and how does it impact the different functions and even disciplines within your company. So I have a new case label. I need to think about the commercialization of new items, and how do I integrate that new case label into that commercialization process and any labeling specs? Does that case label require new labeling equipment to be able to apply that label? Or does it support and the justification of purchasing new labeling equipment? Because if it's done in a manual environment, does that cost more than having a labeling and automation, some type of labeling equipment? How do we integrate that labeling online? So what's the vision of the future of how you want to label your products? Do you want to put a physical label that gets applied to that case? Or do you want to actually put that labeling data and information onto the box and not have a physical label. So you would inkjet it or laser jet it right onto that box. How do we think about artwork changes? Does it impact having a new label? And how about bills of material and manufacturing cost changes? Will that label impact your bills of material for those items when you actually make them? And is there a cost because that label might have a different cost structure than the current one? And will those costs flow into your financials, and make sure that they do flow into your financials? And then you do all this work and all this cross-functional validation. Does the label even work? Does that barcode, is it read? Is it human readable? Is the information on there the right information that you want and that the retailers require? And then you think about your ERP systems. Do they support the data that you need to be able to put into that label? If not, what does it require to capture that information into your systems? And then once you do capture it into your systems, can it be extracted and sent to EDI to map into the different EDI transactions that are going to require that information that's part of that label? So as you can see, it truly takes a village to be able to do some type of change. While this is an example with case labels, you could easily do a similar example with on-time delivery or improved fill rate or whatever it might be that would impact and let's call it optimize the supply chain so that you are avoiding or eliminating those chargebacks. So let's take this one step further and look at an actual case study specific to case labeling. So we had a project with a CPG food company or a client of ours, and they had a number of brands that they had acquired through the M&A process. And what that resulted in was really multiple different types of case labels on their different products and different brands. And there was really no standard. Like they literally had 4 different ways that they put a code date on their packaging. So it could have been day, month, year. It could have been in numbers. It could have been in letters. It was just all over the board. There was really no standard. Some had some information and some didn't. Knowing that Walmart's supplier quality excellence program was in place, and while today there are chargebacks for not being in compliance with Walmart's case label requirements, today that's really done in more of a manual and auditing environment. Tomorrow, Walmart will have that fully automated. So once it's fully automated, every single case will be audited for compliance and issued a chargeback or a chargeback generated if not in compliance. So when you start thinking about that, and what this company was doing is like understanding that I have a number of different kinds of case labels today. I'm not in compliance with any of my brands. How do I become in compliance, and how can I create a standardization of a label? So what we did is we had a small team of our practitioners within Simpactful, and we developed what we called kind of a label requirement matrix. So we literally looked at every single retailer they sold to and what that retailer's compliance requirements were for case labels. And then we took that and we interviewed a cross-functional group within the company and said, okay, similar to what I just showed you, EDI, can you support this? How do you print that case label? What's the manufacturing process? The sales process, the customer service process. So we worked with all of those cross-functional groups, and using this method, we came up with a recommended label that was that used actually existing information that the client already had in their systems, which was great. They didn't have to implement anything new, but really extract that data out and create a standard label across all of those brands. And that supported not only Walmart and Amazon, which are probably the 2 most comprehensive retailers for their case label requirements, but it actually will comply with all of the retailers that they're shipping to. So the client is using our recommendation, and they're working on plans right now with their distribution centers and their manufacturing plants to implement this new label. And they're really trying to determine, it's probably going to be kind of a crawl, walk, run, right? I'll put a label on and then I'll figure out how to put that actually on the box at the time of manufacturing, if that makes more sense. But this label is going to be part of their new item commercialization process. They expect to be in compliance with the Walmart requirements for when Walmart goes systematic. So that's good news, because as we looked at different clients we worked with on case labeling, and not only this case study, but multiple case studies, we see that cost avoidance by complying with this case labeling requirements are anywhere from 1 to 3 million of cost avoidance. Obviously, the more volume you have, the more cost avoidance, but it can get very, very, very costly very quickly, especially when you're a high volume customer. So that's how we handled case labeling with this particular client. And we've seen good results, and they are definitely in a strong position to be able to avoid those chargebacks in the future.
Cheryl, great. Thank you. Again, if anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A. And Cheryl, I was glad to hear your cat is actively engaged in this topic with us today.
Sorry, she likes to be on my conference calls. I have her locked out of the room.
I know she does. And I know she's a big, really upset about chargebacks and wants it to be fixed. So it's great to have her involvement. All right, next slide.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm going to share another case study, and this is really about solving on time in full and ASN chargebacks. So we had a client that had their chargebacks had escalated to about 3% of their gross revenue. That should have said revenue, not margin. And so what we did is we obviously had a team of retail and manufacturer practitioners. We looked at all of their chargebacks, and then we also, which was really unique here, we mapped out their end-to-end supply chain processes, not only physically, but systematically. So what was going on from a EDI standpoint at each point in the process. And we basically did this for their top 3 retailers that were finding them for Target, Amazon, and Walmart. And we basically came up with what are the root causes that are impacting their ability to deliver what these retailers were requiring. And so we had a number of things that came out. One is they weren't really using, they had EDI work processes in place, but they weren't really using all of the data that was being transmitted to them. They were not issuing their ASNs in a timely fashion, right? They were having, challenges with post-good issues, so that would hold up the DC from basically sending the ASN on time, and they were getting tons of ASN chargebacks. They also weren't updating the POs for Target and for Amazon to show what they actually had available versus what the retailer had ordered. So they were getting charged for everything that they were cutting versus using the ability to say, hey, I don't have this product, so I'm not going to ship it to you. And for those 2 clients, you're able to adjust what you're shipping to them so that you can mitigate some of your on-time charges. So with all of that, and these action plans being put in place and working with their EDI experts and their 3PLs, we were able to reduce those chargebacks by 40%, so roughly $2 million across the top 3 retailers. And then we also put plans in place for how do you expand these systemic solutions across all your retailers. So anyway, it was a huge success example, and I think probably the standard approach that you would use to try to figure out, what do I go do? Focus on the big wins first. If there's something that's driving issues across all of your retailers and costing you a lot of money, you obviously want to put those solutions in first. So with that, I'll turn it over to Neil, who's going to talk about shortages.
Yeah, so the third example that we're going to talk about is we've talked about, labeling requirements, we've talked about OTIF, and then the third area that's very common is overshorts and damages. So we had a client that was requesting help to root cause their overshorts and damages because during the first first 3 months of the year, they had over $1 million worth of overshorts and damages. So what we did was we did a value stream mapping session with both the retailer and the supplier. So this was a collaborative effort with the multifunctional resources needed that participated. The scope of this was from the supplier's DC all the way to the store shelf is what we included. Although a lot of the OS&Ds occur once the load arrives at the retailer's DC. So we had a 2-day session, spent time following the flow of the product from all the way from the supplier's DC. And as we were going through the walk, we were not only watching the physical flow of the product, but also the information that is occurring throughout the process as well. So prior to this, we did a little bit of pre-work, and we used a lot of the EDI data that has been mentioned by Lindsay. And we were looking at the information from the order, from the shipment, also to the invoice. And we were looking at what the differences in the quantities were. And so we had some theories already identified from pre-work that as we were doing the 2-day session, we were validating those theories as we went. And so as we went through the process, every place that we had identified a potential issue, we were actually speaking to the people that were executing those processes. So we talked to the people that loaded the trucks. We talked to the people that unloaded the trucks, the ones that counted and scanned product. And that helped us to nail down a lot of the root causes where we had theories. And so after this 2-day session, we had a validated root cause action plan that had ownership from both the supplier side and from the retailer's side. And as this action plan was executed, out of the $1 million that were outstanding, the retailer ended up cutting a check for $700,000. And the reason why the number was lower was that because of the accounting procedures, some of the overshorts and damages had timed out and they were no longer open in the system. And so they were given, the max amount that they could get. And the other thing that's important was that a lot of systemic fixes were put in place. And so they immediately saw a drop off in overshorts and damages going forward. And there was a plan for the supplier to continue working on the smaller and smaller items, but they were very pleased with the benefit that they got from this 2-day session and the investment they had made. Next slide, David.
Wonderful, Neil. Thank you. Let me just say real quickly, Tom has submitted a question via the Q&A, and thank you for that. And we will come to questions here as we finish the slides, a few more slides left, and we do have time left at the end for Q&A. So if there are others, please share.
Yeah, so we've really kind of talked through this as a part of the case studies, but this is kind of the approach you would take to reduce, which is really a quick assessment to understand the current state, where are the biggest chargebacks, where are they occurring, what retailers are they occurring at, are they occurring on certain product lines or packages? You do the deep analytics and root cause identification. You could use, as Neil alluded to, value stream mapping or the process mapping I talked about with Target. And then you're going to really make sure that you're understanding the retailer specific requirements. I think we talked about that before because they do vary, and therefore your answer may be different for each retailer. We sometimes call that service as measured by the customer because it can be very unique, and what you're doing for one customer may not work for another customer. And then as we talked, EDI is so critical, like making sure those systems are getting the right data and that your data is matching. We found an issue with one client where, the case packs and inners were not set up correctly, and it was causing a lot of shortages, right? Because again, the data was not transmitting in a way that made sense. And they were always seeing shortages on particular products. And then as you talk through this, what is your action plan to address each of those? And then I think it's critical, and we have some capability here to really help clients understand what is their current P&L by retailer and what is your cost to serve by retailer. And then next slide, David.
Lindsay, I'll just make a quick
Okay.
comment on that last statement. Cheryl said earlier, it quote unquote, it takes a village, right? It takes a lot of functional engagement on the operations and supply chain side, but also support and engagement from your sales resources, customer service. And so one of the benefits of having that clear retailer P&L and cost to serve is that then it put hopefully accountability through the system to make sure that everyone's working collaboratively to reduce these line items and ultimately improve the P&L on a retailer by retailer basis. And so it's something we're finding is a systemic fix that can drive different measurement to then drive different actions and engagement that is a way to address this holistically, in addition to the individual areas that Lindsay and the team here have identified that can hopefully make improvements until you get a P&L or cost to serve model in place.
And Cheryl alluded to this, but I would say, again, this is just reiterating, you have to have a lot of different experts depending on the problem, right, to come in and solve the situation. And as David kind of alluded to, finance is critical in the whole P&L process. So with that, I don't think I need to read through that. You can go on to the next slide, David. And then what are the benefits? Well, the biggest one is significant cost savings, right? You're going to help your profitability as you reduce these fines and fees. It's all about finding systemic solutions so that you avoid the deductions versus focused on recovering the deductions. We also want to recover any previous deductions, similar to the example that Neil shared on the shortages that were recovered. And then building the internal capability to manage it. So there are things that your organization needs to be doing on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to make sure that you're maintaining and reducing your fines and fees. So we can help, deliver that internal capability. And then last but not least, I know working with lots of retailers that they will not talk to you about any strategic initiatives unless you're delivering on time and in full and delivering their base expectations. So you want to get these under control so that you can talk about win-win solutions on how to grow your business with them. And so anyway, it's critical to get these to a level that you feel confident in and that the retailer is happy with your performance. And this, just as a little thing, what we've seen over the number of projects that we've done in this area is that we're generating at least an 8 times ROI for the clients. So with that, I think we're to questions.
Yeah, and Lindsay, to your point, that's an 8 times over the cost of investment with us in terms of the return, whether it would be recouped deductions or cost avoidance of future deductions and costs coming through quite a bit. And I would just add that when we do get involved, if you are looking for outside help, very much our focus is on the systemic solutions that will help ensure what we pull out at some stage, and you have a going solution that will ensure this gets addressed ongoing versus a recurring dynamic as is often the case right now. So Cheryl, Lindsay, Neil, thank you very much for sharing that. We are starting to get some questions, and so I'm gonna just pull down the screen here. Thank you for these, and let me lead off with the first question, and I'll read it here, and then Cheryl, I think you're gonna help with this one. So this is from Tom. So more and more customers are requesting that purchase order labels be put on cases. Labels with purchase order detail need to be placed on each individual case. Citing the need is based on automation requirements or to resolve repeating shortage claims due to inefficiencies in receiving processes. This is clearly added labor and cost in our DCs. Are we seeing most suppliers concede and put this manual labeling in place at the DC, or finding alternative options to minimize impact on operation?
So this is a great question and a dilemma that I guarantee you every brand is going through, every vendor. So let me kind of boil it down to a couple different parts. So as we talked about, the automation is really increasing. So that automation is receiving product at a case level versus an entire PO being received at one time. And it's being received systematically. So I'm going to use Amazon as the example, because this is very much an Amazon issue, as it is anybody else who is receives systematically. Amazon requires what they call, really a shipping label. So you have case labels that says, here's what's in the box, in a shipping label or here's what this item is, in a shipping label that says, okay, here's what I'm shipping you. And so in that shipping label, it's called an SSCC shipping label. I can't remember the serialized shipping container code. And what that is it's got a number on that label that's a unique identifier. It also has the purchase order number on there and some other information. When the box goes through the laser tunnel to read, it'll take that unique identifier, the license plate, and it'll match it up to the ASN, because the ASN will have that same number. And the system will say, oh, I know what this is, and I know what PO it belongs to, and it will receive it correctly. Now, that's if everything is perfect. There's a lot of issues that could, even though you're putting that label on, it could cause that match of the physical and the system to not, or the virtual, I guess I would call it, not be able to connect, and it'll still go to manual receive, which is where it gets misreceived. Now, there's a cost, obviously, to put a label on, and especially if you have a high volume, and it gets a little bit more challenging if you're a low dollar. So if I'm a case that costs $150, it's probably a little better ROI to put a case label on there, or shipping label, than if I'm a case that costs $10. What I am seeing is I see a lot of what I would call mid-level manufacturers using the case labels. When you get to be a company that has much, much higher volume, there's a lot of resistance to use those case labels. And of course, the warehouse is always going to say, I can't do it. You know, it's going to cost me money in the labor, but you'll literally like bring them to their knees at some time. If there's 10,000 Amazon cases, you have to put a label on. So it's an individual decision. You have to look at it holistically. If you don't put the label on, chances are your items are they'll go to manual receive, and they'll get misreceived against the wrong purchase order, which causes a shortage. In the Amazon's case, the system goes through what's called a smart match. So it's always trying to find that inventory, and it will find some and repay it. But at the end of the day, it never finds 1 to 2% of that volume. So what is that in dollars? And then you think about it, that's also not systematically received. So it's not available for a consumer to purchase. And you just kind of go, where the heck is this product? But bottom line, 1 to 2% of that revenue or your shipped revenue never gets paid. So if you look at it holistically, what does it cost you to put a label? Are there other ways that could be more creative? Amazon will say, well, you could do my pallet program, and then you only need to put a label on a pallet. If that works and it's less cost, maybe that's a better option. But really, it's which is the worst evil, right? The cost of putting the label on, or the cost of not having all the shortages paid back. So I've seen it both ways. My position is I think it's worth it to put the label on. But again, you have to go through a whole holistic in P&L to understand what does it cost me to put a label on, and what is my, it's really going to be cost avoidance, not cost savings. So cost avoidance is a little bit different in the accounting world than a cost savings. So it really does require some thinking and cross-functional input on implementing that solution or not. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, Cheryl, thank you very much. And for the person who asked, if you have more questions there or follow up, or if you want to have us engage directly with you after this, please let us know. Happy to explore. We also have a question from Aldo with regard to any thoughts on the new CVS shelf life compliance program. It's costing quite a bit in fines. Although I guess I'd lead with, I don't know if it feels good to say misery loves company, but I can say that you are not alone. And that new program from CBS is one of many examples of where we are seeing, big cost transference from retailers back to manufacturers in a number of areas. We focused here on chargebacks and more of the supply chain fines and fees and overshorts and damages, but there is more that's on this list of costs that are coming back and forth. And I can just tell you that we're trying to do our best to understand each, to provide services to our clients on how to address those. Interestingly that you brought this up, because just the other day, we started engaging with our CVS expert who used to work there on this new program. It's been developed since she left, but she's still very much in touch with others at CVS to try to understand not just the program intent and terms, which I'm sure you understand, but how to address it in such a way that fines can be reduced. So Aldo, we have your email through your registration, and we will follow up with you as we learn more on this area to see if we can bring back solutions. And if anyone else is interested in learning more about that, feel free to ping us through the chat or Q&A, or back to the registration email we put out there. Actually, we have something on the last slide I'll pull up in a minute with our contact info. And if you want to be a part of that follow-up, please let us know. Another question we've got is, will the team be sending out the recording? And yes, we can send a link to this recording. And as I said earlier, glad that assume that means you're enjoying it. I'm sure you want to watch it again and again, like one of those great movies. But on a serious basis, yes, we will send out a link to the recording that you can share with others. And again, we're happy to engage directly with anyone if that would help. So there's also a question, are there any suggestions on post-audit deductions? Kroger post-audits through the third party are a major challenge, even with proper backup justifying why the manufacturer should be repaid. Again, not to make light of anything here, but I would say misery does love company. I'm not sure who submitted this one, which is fine, it's anonymous, but definitely you are not alone in this dynamic. And what I would say is, unfortunately, it is causing companies to need to invest in more resources to help work through these deductions. But what we also are finding is there are companies who have established themselves or expanded their capability, either third-party brokerage firms like an Acosta, a Crossmark, or others, or other newer third parties who are helping companies address these on a sustainable basis. We, Simpactful, can hopefully engage if you wanted help relative to the steps you can put in place. But when it comes to the actual researching and addressing of the individual deductions, There are some third-party companies out there who could be valuable to partner with, and some of them will work on a call it gain share. If they get the money back, they get a percentage of it as a going need. And so if whoever submitted this, if you're interested in us maybe connecting you to some of those companies, if you're not already familiar, let us know relative to whether there's a systemic solution. I think Neil commented earlier, or Lindsay, the more your company can hopefully get to a collaborative relationship with the retailer, with joint business planning, and ideally collaborative partnerships to take cost out of the system through things like value stream mapping that Neil referenced earlier. We have found companies that are in those levels of partnership can get off the list of audit, or a pause in audit deductions while they put solutions in place. So I would just reference that as the thing we see that works the most, even though we'll admit that is challenging to get to. Before I move on from that one, is anyone else on the Simpactful team, Cheryl, Lindsay, Neil, anything to add to that?
No.
No, okay. And then we have another question here, Greg. Thank you for submitting. Several retailers do not, and I'm going to call on one of the group here to see if you guys can help me with this one. So you're on notice. Several retailers do not allow carriers on docks for delivery and check-in process. How does the team handle chargeback for shortages, overages when a signed in full POD is given to the carrier, yet a deduction is taken for the shortage?
Yeah, I can give an example of what we found at one of our clients. This was happening, and once they've taken the deduction for the shortage, one of the tricks that we used was we had access to their inventory systems, and we could actually see the day that the load arrived, and we could go in and do a before and after inventory of the items that were on the purchase order. And so even though it did require some additional work on the supplier's part, they were able to show that the inventory actually did show up using the retailer's data. So that's one trick that was used to provide further evidence that the client did ship in full, and they should not have been deducted for the shortage.
And I'll just add quickly, because I'm going to give an Amazon example because that's my expertise, but there are a number of technology companies out there that, and when you think about the sheer volume of all of these shortages, I call them virtual shortages. So what the technology can do is go and like say, okay, this PO got shorted 10, and it'll find another PO that was shipped to that same place. Because a lot of times, again, the items get misreceived, and then the system thinks that the PO it was shipped on, it was shorted when it was really received against another PO. So the technology can go and say, okay, you're shorted 10 here, but I found another PO for that location, same time frame, and you received 10 over. And so to do that in a manual environment is really, really hard, but there's some, as technology and automation really get more sophisticated, we're seeing that there are ways that you can actually like identify where that misreceived was through the technology. And then in some technologies will even go and automate the dispute in the portal. If it's in Amazon's case, they have a portal and a way to dispute it. And then we've seen good success in having those be paid back because we're showing Amazon where they were misreceived. But again, I think it's almost impossible to do it manually. And certainly there's a cost with technology, but just it's interesting to see how the technology is changing the way that we manage a lot of these chargebacks.
Okay, well, we're getting close to wrapping up. I do see one more question here. Thank you for this ongoing engagement. Again, I'll open it up to the group as I share. And if we don't, by the way, have an answer on any of these, we will be sure to follow up. But Dan, thanks for the question. How do you handle OS&D when the POD is signed as subject to count? Considering there's acronyms in there, I don't understand.
No,
I'm gonna
yeah,
ask the experts.
Yeah, I was going to say when we looked at OS&Ds for this subject account, I know that there was an issue specifically related to Target that if they found out on the document, if they initialed counted versus subject account in one of the boxes, it made the supplier accountable for it versus Target being accountable for it. And that was one of the learnings they had was in the documents that are being transferred from supplier to retailer, if you make sure that you're filling out the paperwork properly, which is our client learned that they were not filling it out properly. And when they understood exactly what they needed to do, they no longer received any shortages because of the way that they were filling out the paperwork. So I would just make sure that on the transfer of documents between the supplier and the retailer, make sure that anything related to subject account, whether it's on the driver that's picking up the load, or if it's at the DC receiving the load, you just need to make sure that you're filling out the paperwork correctly so that it's not, because sometimes if you check a certain box and the count is wrong, it's automatically supplier's fault. But if you check the right box, then you're not accountable for it. So that was the big learning with this client was they weren't filling out the paperwork correctly. And once they did, the level of shortages related to that issue just dropped off dramatically.
Excellent, excellent. We do have another question here, but as I reference it, just wanted to make sure we put up on the screen an email. If you have questions on this, feel free to email us at that address or call that phone number or text that phone number, and we will do our best, or we will follow up with you promptly. One last question, and then we'll be wrapping up. So this is a great question that I'm sure is top of mind for a lot of people. Do suppliers/manufacturers have a chance to charge, charge retailers back as a countermeasure, e.g. for being late to picking up customer retailer pickup loads, or e.g. for case pick versus layer pick? Again, a great question. I would tell you it's being asked by a lot of folks, and our response is there's always a chance to charge, but of course you want it to be accepted. Simpactful is currently exploring with several companies looking differently at either a price bracket program, bracket pricing maybe better said, and what the retailer has to do to receive the best price, or even a second tier price, or looking at payment terms programs and what is required or allowed to ensure that the retailer not just pays on time, but qualifies for the discount. We believe in the elements of those programs, there's a chance for the manufacturer or supplier to reset some of the terms of those programs to hopefully shift back to a more collaborative relationship and essentially incent, or maybe better said, require the retailer to act differently than they are today. We would expect you'll see some new programs or updated programs coming out from a variety of different manufacturers to address this in the next few months. And if anyone's interested in learning more about that, I know we've said this a few times here, but please contact us. We think there is a way to structure those programs differently to bring about some of what is asked in this question of a chance, maybe not to charge back, but to get the behavior to change to what you're ultimately looking for. Well, folks, we are 2 minutes before the end of the hour. Thank you very much for everybody who joined and participated. We would love any feedback on the value of this webinar and any suggestions for future. But at the same time, please know we will send out a recording to everybody who said we could communicate with them in follow-up when they registered. And again, if you need any more questions answered or anything specific, please contact either the email or phone number on the page. Lindsay, Neil, Cheryl, thank you very, very much, and hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.